Hey, this is Paulo, and this is Mind Your Own Business. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here. I have Leslie Venetz here with me. She's an influencer, I would say, for in the sales world, but also a very, a great person that's adding value to both TikTok, LinkedIn, but so like all over. She's everywhere, thankfully. So Leslie, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thanks for the invite, Pablo. I'm really excited. I feel like I'm blushing at being called an influencer. I'm just like a person that is trying to put good in the world and help other people.
That's amazing. That's music to my ears. We sometimes we overlook like the importance of like putting our content out there, but it actually changes lives without you knowing so. But so yeah, maybe you're an influencer without knowing so, and that's powerful. That's my whole point. Anyway, I'm sorry, starting to asking about your life and your business. Who do you help?
Who do I help? Well, hopefully anybody in sales, more specifically folks in B2B sales, and drilling down a bit from there. I'm really focused on helping women in sales, encouraging them to consider sales as a profession. And certainly, I know a lot of women have a really rough start to their sales careers, and not just women, like sales newbies in general, but when folks are experiencing that rough start to the beginning of their sales career because maybe they feel like a bit of an other in this space, which was something I definitely encountered. I want to be there to tell them that they matter, they belong there, take up space. Sales is a great profession for them.
And what's your why? I mean, I'm curious to know maybe your story of how this mission came to be, like helping women in sales, especially.
Yeah. So I sort of, grew up like in my 20s in a really toxic sales environment, but I didn't actually know it was toxic at the time. Like I'd moved from a small-ish community in Montana to Chicago. I didn't have a network here. I didn't really know anybody else in B2B sales. And so my only conception of sales was kind of the out of date, like used car salesman or like people doing like MLM. And so I was in a really toxic sales environment, practices that just didn't really sort of jive with my moral compass, like a lot of like bro culture, a lot of sexual harassment. And I just sort of thought, Pablo, that like that's what it was. Like that's all there was. Like if you're going to be in sales, this is just what it is, and you have to deal with it and like, get along to get on. And I left that job and landed in an even more toxic environment where unfortunately I had a direct supervisor that was extremely verbally abusive, like the worst types of sexual harassment and verbal abuse and gender discrimination. And I had to leave that job after less than 6 months. And that was about the time that I decided to start my own business, start Sales Team Builder. And my initial sort of vision was, how can I help other women avoid some of these toxic environments, or how can I just be a resource to them to like let them know this isn't okay, and there are other companies out there that don't celebrate like hustle culture and bro culture and toxic masculinity, because it wasn't something that I had visibility on, and it certainly did like a lot of damage.
Totally. And for people out there that's struggling, right? Maybe they're today in that toxic environment and they don't know how to get out. Of course, your first advice would be just get out of it, right? But maybe it's not that easy. Like get out and get yourself another job or create your own business. So maybe 2 or 3 comments about people who's living that today. What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's almost never that easy, right? Because we need jobs to pay for things like rent and medicine, the basics. So I know that for most women I talk to, they do feel like they are a little bit trapped. And when they do leave, there's often a perception that they're job hoppers. Or even I know in the past when I've interviewed and I have a job on my resume that's only 6 months, and people will ask me why I left after 6 months, and I will tell them the truth, which it's deeply personal and still very uncomfortable to talk about with like a total stranger. There's a sense of disbelief that they don't actually think that's why I left. There had to be something else there. So I get it. Like I understand that it's not just as easy as going to get another job. Here's what I would have done differently, knowing what I know now, and maybe folks can employ this in their own life. One, I would have used LinkedIn much differently. In my 20s, I really only used it as like a lead source. And I would have really focused on building my personal brand there so that I was more marketable as a sales candidate and it could have a wider choice of places to work because I had such a strong brand presence. I would have spent a lot more time building a community and a network there and connecting with other professionals that worked for the types of companies I thought I wanted to work for, so I could have a bit of that inside view. So I would say number one is just invest a lot more in your brand and building your community and your network on LinkedIn. And I think two, if you're stuck in that job, like this might be kind of controversial advice, but like literally do the least. Like do enough to be able to get the paycheck and and not get fired while you're looking for another job. But there's, I think I experience it, and I know a lot of women I've talked to experience it, like the feminine urge to over deliver, because maybe if we just work harder, they'll see how much we're worth. Or maybe if we just do that extra project or overachieve on that next quota, the feeling of otherness will stop. I've never seen that to be true. So I think part of it's a mindset shift. Like you don't owe them anything extra. So don't give them anything extra. Use that time to job search, to upskill, to rest, whatever you need to move on.
Oh my God, that's so powerful, like, and eye-opening. Like, not using your social just to scroll and see joke postings or pictures about someone's dog, but actually build your brand and leverage that to have tools for when that hard time comes. Like, you have some place to go, a community, a network, and then also the other tip about not over investing yourself in someone. It's like a toxic relationship, the way I see it. Like a intimate relationship, like you're giving way too much and the other person is not giving you what you're expecting or not enough, and then there's this not equal stage and it's just way too toxic for you. I love
That's
that.
so true.
And what about maybe opening, I'm sorry, creating your own company, right? Like, so you went from a toxic environment to your own thing, right? So that's a big leap, which I love. But then maybe if someone's not in that toxic of an environment, but they also want to create their own thing, they want to have flexibility, or I mean, that's debatable. That thinking about having your own thing, we are more
Freedom,
flexible, but
to some
freedom.
extent.
That's
Yeah.
right. So, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah. So I had a couple of other stops in between. I launched my side business in 2018 as a side business. So Sales Team Builder was very much on the side. I left that toxic environment and ran a startup for 2 years. And then I worked at like a consultative PaaS, like platform as a service company for almost 4 years. So I spent that 6 years where I had a full-time corporate job to really upskill. Like I knew where I wanted to go, and it was either take Sales Team Builder and make it full time, or I wanted to go into a CRO, a Chief Revenue Officer role. So I had a really clear direction, and I used that time and that comfort of having a kind of corporate day job to save a bunch of money and to upskill. So I would suggest one, like, don't just quit your job. I know that's hard to say if you're in a toxic environment. I know that's hard to say if you are just like burned out on corporate America, and like, trust me, I get it. But be be thoughtful and intentional about the process of launching your own company. And maybe, that's something that you can do in less than 6 years. I think I took an especially long time to get to the point where I really felt like it was the right step for me. But whatever that timeline is for you, like, really be thoughtful, try to save as much money as you can, try to figure out what your like purpose project, your passion project is, so that that's aligned to your job, and collect those skills. And I think, like, one last thought I'll share is, don't put a goal that's a thing, like, I have to achieve X. Think about the philosophy of your ambition, not like, what do I want to achieve, but who do I want to be on this path towards achievement.
Like as in, I want to be free of this toxic environment. I want to have this amount of time for myself, or how would that look like for you?
Yeah, for me, I think it was a lot about, like, my legacy and also what was really important to me. So my legacy is that I want to transform sales, or what I hope my legacy will be, I should say, is that I want to transform sales into an inclusive and a respected profession. So, like, that's where I'm going. And then freedom. Like, I really want the freedom to be able to pick the types of clients I work with, to do the type of work that I want to do, to work where I want, to have some freedom and being able to spend more time with my family, who isn't based in Chicago, where I am. So those were my sort of North Stars. Like, I wanted to help people, I wanted to help the profession, and I wanted for myself a lot more freedom to make sure that the work I was doing really aligned with my values.
So that's great. So for instance, if someone's looking out for, hey, I want to make X amount of money per year, instead of that going, I want to be this kind of person, and because of that, maybe like the drive comes from the philosophy of life, or and the mindset from within, and then the outside will fall into place. I love that.
True. Yeah. And I mean, I still have a financial goal. Like, my financial goal is to still make $250,000 this year. So, like, there's still that. But instead of being like, I need to take every client that comes my way because I have to hit that 250K, I can say that 250K is important, but what's more important is the philosophy of my ambition. So, do I really need that client, or can I spend that time and energy finding a different type of client that better aligns with my philosophy?
I'm curious, going back to the toxic environment where we might be working on without knowing. Uh, so this is going to be, I'm guessing, somehow controversial, but what can we do as men, right, to improve that environment for you? Like, what would you say if I were, let's say, your friend, your colleague, and we have confidence, and you can say, hey, Pablo, I mean, the way you spoke with Maggie the other day was not right. I mean, you should change that. Like, maybe we as men, we are not seeing something, and you have that, that eye to catch it. What would
Mhm.
you say to us?
Yeah. I think part of it you already nailed, Pablo, that it's just like, listen to women. I can't tell you how often I've been like, here's what my view of the situation is, or here's what happened. And the first response is, you must have misinterpreted that, or you're probably just too sensitive. So I think first is just listen to women, which you already called out. I think something else is that we often hear men call themselves allies, and like, that's great, but that's the bare minimum. Like, being an ally and supporting women as your equals Like that is just the least amount that I think should be asked. So I really encourage men to think about making the jump from being an ally to an advocate. So how can I say something in a meeting if I hear a colleague take an idea from a woman and try to use it as their own or interrupt? Or how can, instead of just saying things like, yes, I think we should have more women in leadership, how can I actually find a woman to mentor to help them become a leader? So it's that practice of, instead of just sort of saying it, like taking some action behind it.
What I'm hearing you say, Leslie, and I'm sure about this, it's not only sexual harassment that we're talking about here, it's equality of opportunities. It's women having, like what you said, like she said something and then he disregarded that. Like, is not, that's not a valid for me opinion for me, right? It's not, we're not going to take that into consideration at this table. And then like the feeling of that should be like defeat. I mean, how come you go the next day to work with your own ideas, with your own eagerness to grow and to add value to your company? If every time you do it you get shut down just because you are who you are. So it's not only
Yeah.
being a woman and then someone wants to date me, so to speak. It's so much more than that.
For sure. I would say that, like, a piece of the problem are those issues of sexual harassment. The much more prevalent issue is the gender discrimination or the inequity. When you look at gender, and I mean, some of it's just cut and dry, right? Like only about 30 to 35% of B2B sales professionals are women. So we are outnumbered. Only about 10 to 15% of B2B sales leadership are women. So there's just inequity in the numbers. And then you really see that reflected in the behaviors and the actions on most sales teams. So yeah, like, yes, sexual harassment is something that happens. Obviously, it's a part of my story, but I think what is much more common, like the story of most women in sales, is that experience of otherness, is that experience of being disregarded, is that experience of just not having their ideas, I think, regarded with like the same amount of esteem, or being kind of swept off. And it's like those things we always hear, like, oh, she's just so emotional. Those kind of like dismissive or like microaggressions. I think those are much more common and much more prevalent, and the pieces that people really need to be like hyper aware of.
Right? And let's say there's a young woman in sales aspiring to be like VP of sales, management position. And so how do you go about sales, like your company, with this philosophy or this mentality? Is that maybe you having more interactions with them, mentoring them, having, I see your content, which is very holistic, but actually very thoughtful. Is that like the way you run your company?
Well, I'm a solopreneur, so I don't have anybody that works for me. But in other roles where I've been a hiring manager, I think, like, sort of the point that you're on is, how do we create an inclusive environment? And oftentimes folks will talk about diversity, which is clearly important, and that's the starting line. But what we usually don't see then is the action of inclusivity happening within the sales environment. And that could look like a mentorship. It could look like, always being really proactive about going to it's likely going to be one woman in the group, like, one or two women in the group, and asking for their opinion, because women are socialized, to be quiet, or to be maker, to kind of be in the background. That could Like that could just look like making sure that the women on your team know that the talk tracks or the sales training that was probably created and led by like able-bodied cis het white men isn't the only way to sell, that they encourage different perspectives and different voices. So I think it's just like really being proactive about saying like your voice matters, your perspective matters, and we want everybody to hear it.
I'm curious, this might be a random question. What's the worst piece of advice you usually hear in the sales world in your profession?
What is the worst piece of advice? I don't think it's probably gender related, but I feel like the worst piece of advice is when people are like, yeah, just go out and, you know, send 500 people the same exact email. Like, I feel like the worst piece of advice is sales leaders and sales cultures that are still like really stuck in the past of just like generic cold outreach to everybody in their CRM versus what we really need to do as modern sellers. And that's like lead with relevance, lead with value, lead with personalization where appropriate, so that all of our outreach is very buyer centric instead of seller centric.
Thank you for that. That's great. I love it. What mindset is there a good mindset you need to develop? Maybe resilience, even some techniques, meditation, mindfulness, or something else you might want to develop if you want to create your own thing. Be it a solopreneur or even like a business, a big business.
Yeah. So, I mean, every single solopreneur, entrepreneur, business owner is in sales, right? Like, you're not going to have a successful company if you're not embracing the fact that you are also in sales. So I think it's true for business owners, it's true for sales professionals. You have to have a tremendous amount of grit, like just a tremendous amount of grit, right? Like, this is a really, really difficult profession. We do get rejected really often. And beyond that, I think we're sort of like regarded as a pariah, right? Like, when you tell somebody I'm a sales professional, their immediate reaction isn't usually like, wow, that's so impressive. They're like, oh, like sales. So it's, it's kind of like a disregarded profession that faces a lot of rejection. So you have to be super, super, super gritty. I think how that looks for me is that I spend 10 minutes meditating every morning when I get up. I ride my bike. You can see it in the background here. You can see the chair of my SoulCycle bike. I journal every single day. I do my best to eat pretty healthy. So like I didn't necessarily do that in my 20s. And by necessarily, I mean, I did not do that at all in my 20s. And it led to a huge amount of burnout. Like a huge amount of burnout. I was like physically ill very often, like mentally and emotionally, I was exhausted and just always really felt like I had frayed edges. And so I've, in my 30s, like transformed my habits to make sure that I am fully like recharged and rested so that I can be 100% present and be really intentional about my actions as a salesperson, instead of that, like, just like spray and pray. I'm going to just go, and hope something sticks.
And I'm curious, was there a tipping point or something happened that you went like, I need to meditate, I need to exercise, I need to change my mindset or my philosophy if I want to live a healthier life. Like, it changed your life, basically. That inner change, it went outward, if that makes sense.
It does.
Was there a tipping point, or was that progressive throughout the years?
I think it was more of an evolution. I mean, I've always been, I grew up in Montana, so I grew up in nature. So I've always been a person that felt like really connected to nature. And I lost a lot of that when I moved to Chicago and like moved in my 20s and was like, making six figures as a 20 something and was in this like super bro-y hustle culture environment. And so I think I just kind of lost myself for a little bit and then slowly found my way back to those things that made me feel more whole. And then, definitely like leaving a job that was very toxic to go to an even more toxic environment. And that put me into like a very deep depression. I was feeling a ton of anxiety, just I was not in a good place. And so I think that was the stopgap where I was like, I can't go back, and I can't go back to the way things were before. So I need to double down on this direction I'm going. And that was a direction of self-care and mindfulness and intentionality.
What would you like to have known before going solo? Like, is there a roadblock we should be aware of 2022 in sales? Maybe someone's thinking about, yeah, I'm going to, start my own thing, but they're not thinking about this that happened to you.
Yeah, what would I do differently before going solo? Um, Maybe I actually would have done it sooner, which is probably not the answer to your question. But I really felt at the beginning of 2021 that being a full-time founder, being able to donate 100% or focus 100% of my time on sales team builder was the direction I wanted to go. And I did everything I could to talk myself out of it, like put up every roadblock. You need a real job, you need health insurance, just everything I could possibly tell myself to talk myself out of it. So I like genuinely spent like 9 months just trying to ignore my intuition and ignore all the signs the universe was sending me. So I think like part of me is like, ooh, I would have done it sooner. Also, part of me knows that 9 months was like extremely formative. And when I did make the call, I was able to make it with 100% of confidence and be like all in and not be worried about whether or not I was doing the right thing. That was just not an answer to your question at all. I'm not sure I would have done anything different because I think like every piece of the journey was important to get me to where I am now.
I love that. I love that. You wouldn't change anything for the world.
I wouldn't.
I love it. And so, is there a good piece of advice, maybe a book, seminar, author, someone that really impacted you positively, of course, and then really shaped you?
One person, no. So I would say my favorite book, sales book that I think everybody should read is The Challenger Customer. So it's the follow-up book to the Challenger Sale. I actually don't love the Challenger Sale. Like, don't come at me. But the Challenger Customer, the follow-up book is incredible. It's just like this really like buyer centric. It's just an incredible book. So go read that, particularly if you're in enterprise sales. Like, read it now. Go download the Kindle and read it as soon as you're done listening to this podcast. I've been really lucky to pick up some great mentors along the way. I encourage everybody listening to find mentors. It's really hard to do, so I get that. But even if it's somebody that just mentors you on like a particular project or that you can bounce a specific idea off of, like go and ask people for help. One of my mentors that I've had now for about 6 years is a guy called Josh Braun, Braun. He's incredible. He's all over LinkedIn, great content. He recently launched his TikTok channel and it's already like rocket ship. In like a month, he's already surpassed the number of followers I have. So he's really worth following. There's another woman called Samantha McKenna, Sam Sales. She's really worth following as well. Just again, those like really buyer centric messages, like meet your seller where they are, meet your buyer where they are at. Don't make them come to you and have emails that are like, I am and I do and we are, because that doesn't work. I'm trying to think of who else. Like, I mean, I read a lot of sales books. I'm not a big podcaster. I consume a lot of content on LinkedIn. Follow Gong, like Gong. Their stuff is incredible, like so good. And I've really loved the free sales communities that I'm a part of. I'm also a member of Pavilion, which used to be Revenue Collective, which is pretty pricey, but there's a lot of other sales communities that kind of replicate that model that are totally free. I'd call out Rev Genius, Sales Hacker, and Modern Sales Pros. So join those free communities, because then you can like get access to templates and people that you can kind of sense check your ideas off of, and you can put things out to the group and get feedback. Yeah, I feel like that's enough to get people started.
And then I was curious, when you say a mentor, do you mean like an actual human being next to you, or virtually, like giving you advice? Or could be those influencers that you actually never get to know personally, or one on one, but you actually get to learn from them so much still.
Yeah, I think both. I mean, like obviously there's a lot of people out there who engage with my content frequently, who give me feedback, who I feel like I have a relationship with, but I'm not their mentor. That mentorship needs to be somebody that you do like, you can really be vulnerable with them, that you have that open line of communication with. Interestingly, Josh, my mentor that I've had the longest, I've never met in person. So it has been totally virtual, but I mean, we talk like probably once a week. And then I have some other mentors that have supported me on specific projects, none of whom I've ever met in person. So it can be a totally virtual relationship, but it needs to be one where there is that kind of live feedback loop. But the way that I have gotten all of my mentors is by approaching strangers whose content I really like and vibe with, engaging with their content, building a relationship with them through LinkedIn, and then saying, hey, would you mind jumping on a call with me to talk through this? Or, hey, like, would you mind if once a month we connected and I could sense check some ideas? And they almost always say yes.
Oh, well, I need to try that. I need to get the courage to do so. And I'm curious, before we wrap up, I do have this burning question about TikTok and how to use TikTok for sales. Please tell me.
Yeah, TikTok for B2B sales, really interesting topic. So where TikTok is at now, or TikTok for business, I should say, is it's still super focused on B2C. I mean, TikTok only launched the concept of business accounts 18 months ago. So it's really new across the board, but right now it's more like people selling like bath bombs and jewelry, or like real estate people or car salesmen. So we are out there right now, like actively creating what the B2B sales talk community should look like. What I'm not seeing work is B2B companies creating content. They're having a really hard time getting traction. What I am seeing work really well are either founders or individual contributors just sharing topics that they are passionate about. So obviously you see that's what I'm doing on Sales Tips Talk. Other great examples would be what the folks at Sales Feed are doing, which is actually owned by Vidyard, but Vidyard is no part of it. So just Sales Feed sharing really fun content, things that are educational, doing the trends, things that are inspirational, that's taking off. But then you see like a Panda Doc or a Chili Piper trying to create content directly from their company account, not so much. Another great example is Will Allred, who's the founder of Lavender, which is an incredible email tool, like plug for them. I don't get paid for them, but they have a freemium tool, try lavender.com. It's really useful for cold copy. So he has an account that's Will the email guy or something like that. So it's not his business account, but it's still him sharing free tips on how to write good cold copy. So use it to build your personal brand versus trying to push your company content out, and you're going to have a lot more success.
I love it. Going back to the personal brand we spoke a moment ago. Leslie, this has been so great. I want to thank you for being here. Where do we find you? And then any final thoughts or comments?
Yeah, so please find me on TikTok at Sales Tips Talk. I also spend a ton of time on LinkedIn. You can just search by my name, Leslie Venetz, which I'm sure will be in the show notes. Also, really exciting is that I just made a new product. It's a physical product, and it's your daily dose of sales inspiration. And I feel like it jives so well with the topic of this podcast. It's so cute. I should have had one handy. But they're these like little capsules, and each of them has a scroll inside. So think like fortune cookie scroll. And when you unwrap them, it's a daily dose of inspiration, because we know in sales, it's like, essential to have your mind right. And the research tells us it's 30 days to form a new habit. So it's that positive, that habit of positivity, that positive mental attitude in 30 days of sales inspiration. So cute. So I will share the link to that as well. Great gift for the salesperson in your life or for yourself.
100%. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, Liz. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.